at the September general meeting. So we've used, July meetings for emergencies or for information or special presentations, but the last regularly scheduled meeting for all committees is the June meeting. Before we get into the two presentations that we have, I just want to do a bit of land use committee housekeeping. And, that pertains to follow-up on the part of committee members. There has been, in the past several months when we were still meeting in person, a lot of back and forth with other committees about what is in meetings and do they accurately represent what was discussed. That has never been an issue with land use because we draft the minutes, we circulate the minutes, and we, diligently follow through to ask for responses. But what I have noticed recently is less than half of the committee is actually responding when we send around minutes for review and comment. And so your silence could mean that everything is perfect, or it could mean you didn't see it. We have no way of knowing. So ideally, if you have reviewed the minutes and you have no comments, acknowledge receipt and say that you have no comments. There are a handful that regularly provide their comments, but I'm really looking for all committee members to let me know, or in many cases now it's Chris who is preparing the minutes. I might take an initial look at them, but get back to both of us to let us know if there are additional things that you would like to add, or if there are questions, so that we can take care of that. And I would say the same thing is true when I circulate to the committee reference information. There was some information that I circulated to the committee pertaining to both the BSA application that we'll be considering, but also the West 158th Street Row House District. I think the resolution that the board passed years ago, I circulated that for reference so that committee members who were not committee members at the time have some background on what we're talking about. When you get things like that, respond, let me know that you got it. I want to make sure I have your proper email address, and I want to make sure that when I'm in a meeting such as now and I'm referring to documents that I forwarded, that you actually received the documents, and so we're all on the same page. Any questions, comments on that from my fellow committee members? You have to unmute yourself if you do.
I have a quick statement that I want to mention. I'm gonna send you my email address that I check more frequently.
Okay.
I've sent it to the office, but I don't think you guys received the update.
Yeah, they didn't send it to me.
All right, so I'll send that to you. Thank you.
Not a problem. And so with that, before we begin, let me once again introduce myself. I'm Wayne Benjamin, and I chair Land Use for Community Board 12. And before we start the presentations, I would like my fellow committee members who are online to introduce themselves. I'm starting with Vivian Ducat.
Vivian Ducat. I'm to your right, depending on how you look at your building.
Well, I'm to the left looking at the screen. And so the next one looking at the screen is Mr. Berlin.
Hi, I'm Mr. Berlin. I'm Jim Berlin. Nice seeing all of you.
The assistant chair of the committee is Chris Ventura. I say hi, Chris. Chris, are you unmuted? Well, Chris Ventura is our assistant chair. He is there. He may have stepped away. Also, we have Omar Tejada, who definitely needs to unmute himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is
Hard to hear you.
You need to turn up your volume.
Can you hear me?
Much better, much better.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Omar here. Pleasure.
Thanks, Omar. And also we have Rosie Perez, who is a fairly new Land Use Committee member.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosie.
I also have other board members, including a former committee member, Osi Kaminer. Say hello, Osi.
Hi. What? I'm no longer on the committee?
You haven't been on the committee for several months.
No, I think I'm back on the committee.
Well, speak to the committee, to the community board chair, and give me that update because the attendance list that I have does not include you.
Isn't it nice that I know all of this?
Well,
Okay.
yes. So that's why we speak. And then I also see a number of literally brand new community board members online. And if you each would like to like unmute and say hello, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Leo Jimenez here.
Leo, good to see you.
Hi, my name is Mariella Graham.
Hello, Marielle. Anyone else? Okay, so with that, we have two agenda items in addition to whatever items of old or new business. The first item is the consideration of a BSA application for the Wynn Community Music Charter School. And this is an application that was presented to land use in February of this year. We had a detailed conversation about that, and I circulated, I think it was last month for reference, the February committee minutes so that everyone who was not at the meeting had some background, and also so that the members who were there, since it is going back several months, could just refresh. This is not your, not I was going to say your typical, but this is not one of the BSA applications that has come before the board in the past where what is being requested is some kind of a bulk increase. This is for a special permit to allow a school or school use to be placed in a building that has C8 zoning. And the C8 zoning is, simply put, something that is really more automotive focused. And I also mentioned at that time and at last month's meeting, and then circulated for reference to the committee members, the community board passed a resolution several years ago asking the Department of City Planning to rezone various C8 districts in Washington Heights and Inwood because that zoning designation really does not allow for any residential development, any community facility, cultural, the things that, we say that we need more of. C8 zoning doesn't allow, and this is a perfect example where you cannot build a school in a C8 district. So that is the reason why this project needs a BSA special permit. It's a renovation of an existing building. At that time, I think both the traffic studies and the environmental studies were not complete. So we recommended that the applicants coordinate with our Health and Environment Committee, our Traffic and Transportation Committee, and our Youth and Education Committee, so that those committees, although this is really just asking for permission to put a school use in a C8 district, those committees would have interest in aspects of what's going to be happening with the project, and they have the opportunity to discuss it. All of those meetings took place in May. And so we then suggested that the applicants come back to us for us to more formally consider that. So with that, I turn the floor over to Richard Lobel, who is counsel representing the applicant, as well as any of the members of the Wynn Charter School who are present. So Mr. Lobel, you have to unmute yourself and take us forward.
Thank you, Wayne. Good evening. Thanks to the committee for having us here again. As was discussed, this is a special permitted BSA, and the applicant team has had what we feel are very thorough and successful meetings with, as Wayne mentioned, other committees for CB12. So, I think we're here to talk about the specifics behind the results of those meetings, the special permit with focus on traffic and environmental issues. I think I would turn it over to Amanda, who attended all the meetings and can kind of guide some of the various team members and professionals that we have regarding the consideration of the factors in the special permit.
Sure. Also, we're joined by Tom Gluck, project architect. Tom, if you want to share your screen, you can show the presentation that we've shown various other committees. If it's helpful to walk through the plans of the building again. I know some of you have already seen this at the other committee meetings, but some of you may not have. Tom, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
Okay. I need someone to, it says I'm disabled. I need someone to allow my screen sharing.
That has already happened. Try it again.
Okay.
So yeah, in the meantime, we had
Still
very
says disabled.
positive and productive meetings with the Health and Environment Committee, Traffic and Transportation, and Youth and Education. There were many comments and a robust discussion about traffic, about loading and unloading, about noise impacts, both on the school and the surrounding area. About air quality, about, all the pieces of the environmental assessment statement, were reviewed and discussed with the various committees. We answered a lot of questions, had a very good discussion. And really, all of the committee meetings were generally positive. Everybody seemed to be excited about the school generally coming to this location. The applicant has also taken many of the community members' advice to reach out to neighboring organizations, several senior centers. The bid, the applicant has reached out to all of those parties to say, hey, we're going to be a good neighbor. We want to streamline our services with all of your services, and we want to make sure everything runs smoothly on the block.
I have a quick question about that, because I saw the comment, and I believe the chair of our licensing committee, who happens to, I guess, be the executive director of the bid, mentioned something about coordination. What is it that the charter school is being asked to do vis-a-vis coordination with the bid?
Well, with the bid was just to coordinate, I think, more just generally that we were coming to the street, and they were, very involved with the commercial establishments on the street, and to say that, they're willing to work with whatever the bid needs. More specifically with the senior centers, it was more about coordinating unloading and loading on the street, because they also have buses and vehicles for people with special needs or handicapped individuals coming and unloading to the building, I believe 2 doors down. So largely the conversation with them was really coordinating, when the school gets in, their timing and safety and things around loading and unloading in conjunction with those organizations.
So how much of a presentation should I run through? You want me just quickly to run through the bones of the building? I know many of you have seen this multiple times. So.
Some committee members have not seen it, so I would do a quick presentation of, what the floor plans and elevations look like, so they know what we're talking about. I mean, I did share the plans with everyone, but if you simply would, walk it through, that might also help.
Certainly. So I'm going to just step back for a minute. The location is on 181st Street between Amsterdam and Audubon, just before the bridge that goes out towards the Bronx. It is an existing building. It's a 4-story, excuse me, a 4-story parking lot currently. You can see this is the top of the
parking
garage.
Screen.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, black.
Oh dear.
That's all I see on my iPad.
All right, let me try.
There's some
Is
menus
that better?
down the bottom. There you
There
go.
you are.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Sorry. Okay, let
Not
me
a problem.
quickly back up. Thank you for letting me know. So the building is here. It's mid-block on 181st Street, just before the bridge over to the Bronx. It is an existing building, and this line here is the profile of the existing building. It's a nice looking building, and the intention is to kind of refurbish the state of the brick and obviously replace all the windows. And then the new portion, which is added on, is set back. So that's not something that will be present from the street. You can see here in the section the shape of the old building, and then we're adding on one floor here to make it for four additional classrooms, and then a gymnasium on the top, and the rest is just mechanical and equipment to serve the building. This is kind of a more technical drawing. I can leave this. We can come back to this if we need to, but this shows, and there may be questions about accessing it and transportation, but let me just quickly run through the bones of the building. What's unique about WIN is that it uses the El Sistema system of using music as a way of providing primary education to kids, in this case, K through 5. And so all the kids go have music twice a day. And then also the performance, they learn instruments starting in kindergarten, in first grade, and then it culminates in a series of performances over the course of a year. And so as many charter schools as we've done, we've never done one at this size that has a full theater. So the organization of the building is sort of based around that. On 181st Street, you come in past the offices and reception and welcome area, and then on the street level is a 400-person house theater that can house that can stage a performance with all the kids. Downstairs are the rest of the music classrooms, and then because the rear yard is lower than the street level, you can see street here, there's 2 kindergarten classes which give them kind of direct access to the outdoor, which is helpful because they don't have as far to go to get to recess space. And moving up to the building, you can see the basic strategy classrooms on the perimeters. There's a cafeteria and another classroom on the second floor. And then in the middle is all the core and support spaces and offices. And like I said before, the gymnasium on top. So the section
is the gymnasium something that was added since the February presentation? Because I seem to recall that at the upper floor, there was sort of outdoor, play space that was partially covered, but I don't recall a fully enclosed gymnasium.
So that could be. We've done several of these. That might be right. If you recall it that way, then I'm certain that is right. So
yeah, and there's nothing objectionable about that. I think it's good to add an enclosed gym.
No, I appreciate you pointing it out because I've kind of lost the iterations. I've lost a little bit track of. So I'm just going to jump to that top floor. Maybe we work the plans on the way down. So on the very top floor, you still do have an outdoor recreation space. So this is programmed for recess. And just kind of the stairs and circulation and shaft space. And then there is a gymnasium up here. Now it's a tight gym, but for a K through 5 school, it provides a good space for the active play and the curriculum that goes along with physical education. And that is in the back of the building. And then moving down, the 2 4th grade, this is also new space. The 2 4th grade classrooms, 2 5th grade classrooms. This is the rear yard setback requires it to be at this. So this is a compliant zoning setback. This floor is a little bit smaller than the existing floors because the existing building was bigger. And here you can see the basic strategy. 2nd grade and 1st grade, there's a science room, dedicated science classroom, and then support spaces, counseling spaces, offices, and core and bathroom and that stuff. The 2nd floor has 2 more classrooms at the street, 181st Street, and then a cafeteria, and then an additional kind of flex classroom in the back. And then that takes us back down to the main level, the entry level. You'd enter off the street into a lobby, administration and reception all right in front. Kids would go up the stairs and down the stairs to the rest of the building. And then during an event, you'd be able to come in and load the house, which is, like I said, 400 seats. So I don't want to take up too much time. I'm happy to dive into more specific questions. I think I just hit the last floor plan. Then in the cellar, the front is occupied by all the services, utility rooms, but we do have large windows in the back. So there's a dedicated kind of kindergarten area with its own little vestibule, its own bathrooms, and its own outdoor space. You know, they're the ones with the shortest legs, so it's nice to have them not have to travel too far, too often during the class day. And then I'm happy to direct the presentation towards whatever issues or maybe Amber or Amanda want to take over with some of the other.
I know the Youth and
environmental
Education Committee asked, and, you know, I mean, I know the answer, but they wanted to make sure the building was accessible to, you know, students who have disabilities. So as a newly renovated building, this is going to be fully ADA compliant?
Fully ADA compliant. There's an elevator, you can see it stacked up again. So by and large, stairs will be the primary mode of travel for the kids. But fully ADA compliant and also for service, there's an elevator that would be usable, and it comes right off. We've tried to create these kind of core areas, and both stairs and the elevator access that. So whether it's someone who needs to use an elevator on a teacher or staff or admin or students, obviously.
And Steve Simon, who's the chair of our Health and Environment Committee, but also a member of Land Use, he's going to be late. So what were some of the things you discussed with the Health and Environment Committee? What were their concerns vis-a-vis the environmental studies, and how did you answer those concerns?
Sure, I'll step in here.
Yeah, please.
So this is Amber Cartine with Equity Environmental, and I prepared the environmental assessment statement. So we did the predominant studies that we have in the environmental assessment statement are air quality, noise, and hazardous materials and transportation. So health and environment, we really focused on the hazardous materials findings as well as air quality and noise. So why don't I just kind of summarize and go through those one by one. So for the noise analysis, we looked at this a number of ways. We looked at just the existing ambient noise levels. We actually did 3 different readings. We did a reading at ground level, fronting 181st Street where the mouse is there. We did another reading on the existing roof, which at the rear. And then another, yeah, right there. And then another at ground level of the existing rear yard. And those noise readings captured, existing ambient noise levels, including noise associated with the FDNY vehicles across the street. And then what we did was we looked at occupancy of each of these terraces. And so that noise of the children playing is added on to that ambient noise to determine the level of basically the thickness of the windows and walls and the level of attenuation that's required to ensure that the inside is attenuated to an acceptable level. So we did that analysis and we specified that attenuation level, and we also looked at the potential impact of students playing in these areas on adjacent buildings. And we looked at a number of different receptors and actually did a very detailed line of sight study to see how high each of these enclosures around the terraces need to be. Is there areas that we would have to restrict access for students, which was the case here, in order to ensure that there would be no adverse impact to any of the surrounding. Actually, as of yesterday, DEP did get back to us with a letter on that. They've reviewed our findings, and they are in concurrence with the results of those findings.
And then so the results of those findings from DEP basically say what? That they're okay?
So it's twofold. It's one being the height of each of the enclosures.
Mm-hmm.
They agree with what we've specified in terms of height. So I believe, Tom, 15 feet at the cellar enclosure, roughly 7 on the 4th floor, and then remind me what we have for the.
I think it's
or
15 on the top, but only on the side. It doesn't show up in this section. I have to go
Sidewall.
to a roof plan.
right. And then in addition to that, the level of building attenuation, which I can pull up right now, it's either 31 or 33 dBi for window wall attenuation as a composite window and wall combined.
Okay. And that's as of
As well-
yesterday.
That's as of yesterday, as well as the areas that you're seeing like on this site plan in white. Those areas would be, there would be no access there.
So we've restricted access. This is the top floor, the top roof, the recess. We pulled it back from this edge so that this wall can provide the block so we don't negatively impact the building that's going up now on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the fourth floor, this terrace is pulled back for the same reason. So noise doesn't, there's a courtyard in that planned building in here. And so we'll be far enough away and be able to provide adequate noise levels to their windows. And then the other one is the one in the cellar, which affects the residential buildings to the south. And there this wall is 15.5 feet tall, I think. And such that kids in here, you saw in this section, the line of sight is blocked within 30, I think it's 30 feet or 34 feet.
35, I believe, was the distance of impact. Yeah. Any questions on noise? I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll move on to air quality and hazardous materials. Okay. So for hazardous materials, to date, where we're at is that a phase 1 was completed, identified some potential vapor intrusion issues that needed to be further investigated. A phase 2 was conducted several months back, and that has been reviewed by DEP, and now the engineer, who's not on here, so I'm speaking to what was done on their end. The engineer is putting together a remedial action plan to specify the mitigation measures that would be employed in the building. And actually the results of the phase 2 did not show any exceedances to soil vapors above regulatory thresholds. So the vapor barrier that would be employed is more so, and Carlo, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that was my recollection of the findings.
Yeah, that the vapor mitigation recommendation is a vapor barrier just as a precaution,
right,
of any vapors that might intrude. In fact, it's a passive system, which if they felt like there was going to be any kind of intrusion, they would have had an active system where you would have a fan and things of that nature. But they decided just, and we do, and I work with schools a lot, so we kind of take this as a precaution in all schools.
Okay. And so you mentioned the phase 1 is complete, and the next step with the phase 1 is what?
Oh, so the phase 1 I actually had already sent over previously after the initial meeting with land use. I sent that over to Stephen.
Yeah, to health and environment.
To health and environment. And then the next step to that was actually putting together what's called a remedial investigation work plan, which basically details the level of investigation that's going to be conducted for DEP approval prior to going out and actually doing that field work, which would involve taking soil borings and the full scope of investigation. Where are they being taken and what's being conducted and how many locations? So that was approved by DEP. The engineering team then went out and did that investigation. And then the next step after that was putting together a remedial investigation report summarizing the findings of that phase 2 field investigation. That has been completed. And now the engineering team is coordinating with DEP on the next submittal item, which is a remedial action plan, which basically indicates here are the results of this investigation, and then based on that, what's going to be implemented in the building.
Okay. Does that basically, capture the high points of what you discussed with health and environment?
Yeah, that does.
And with traffic and transportation, I think one of the points the chair shared with us, and I believe I circulated this to the committee, is I guess the interesting thing is, since this building is currently used as a garage, converting it from a garage to a school actually reduces, not increases, the number of vehicular trips. But I know there was still some discussion about the coordination of drop-offs and arrivals. So sort of tell us a bit about sort of the highlights of what TNT was concerned with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the general concern was that, we recognize that this is a relatively busy roadway.
You could say that.
As you've said, I mean, for all schools and how you do traffic analysis, you do not take any kind of offset to say, oh, okay, so because you're looking at a number and a threshold number. You don't say for a school, we have 80 ins and outs associated with the garage, net it out, because we're looking at it from just the raw standpoint of what are the traffic conditions going to be at the school. So we had actually, collected data on the existing WIN location and looked at where the students reside and how the modes of travel in order to basically prepare a preliminary model of the number of vehicular trips, the number of school buses, the number of pedestrians, and get a general sense of where they're going to be coming from. Those then get assigned to the local network. And that's called a level 1 and level 2 traffic analysis. That's currently under DOT review. For traffic, this actually gets reviewed by DOT. There's a Traffic Engineering and Planning Division, as well as DOT School Safety also reviews this to make sure that they're weighing in on any kind of recommendations that they have regarding, student safety and the road network and any geometric modifications, pavement marking, signage changes that would be required here. So throughout this whole process, we're going to be working very closely with DOT. And I think, a lot of the questions revolved around the outcome of the analysis and loading and unloading. And, at this point, we have an idea of roughly how many vehicles. We have an idea of where we would be proposing, any kind of vehicle drop off and the protocol associated with that. But we're still waiting for DOT review and working with them. So, we don't have any letter in hand or hard findings yet.
So that process is still ongoing, and I'm assuming that you will coordinate directly with TNT on that.
Right, we would be coordinating directly with them, and it's important to note that for an application like this, as a threshold level finding, the school needs the environmental studies which support the legal findings of this special permit, need to determine that students can arrive and depart to the school safely.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I understand. It's just that, what is being asked of land use is something very specific, and I'm sure health and environment would want to be updated on, how the environmental studies and the environmental work progresses, and TNT would want to be updated on, how the studies and mitigation measures are developed, and those are things that you don't need to go land use for. You can coordinate directly with those committees.
We're happy to share, any kind of letters or correspondence as they come through and provide update as to where we're at with the analysis. That's not a problem.
And is there anything more vis-a-vis the discussion with traffic and transportation?
There was some discussion about the catchment area of the school and how we determined some of the travel patterns and the factors that we've used to do transportation, just because this is considered a little bit more of a a specialty school, but, you know, in geocoding the existing students at the existing WIN location, and Tom, I don't know if you have that graphic. You know, what we found is, and Charlie can speak to this as well, that this is very much a neighborhood. You know, there are a lot of children walking, and I was out there at the existing location observing, you know, arrival and dismissal, which, can you go back to the previous slide, Tom? Oh, maybe pop the screen open. Oh, we lost it. And I observed, you know, very orderly arrival and dismissal. There was, you know, there's administrative staff stationed outside the door with walkie-talkies. They're in coordination with both faculty within the building, and then also bus arrivals, and making sure all of that is orchestrated in a safe and orderly manner. So I was very happy with what I saw there. Charlie, I don't know if you want to, I saw you on mute, so.
Oh, no, I was going to say that I did just email. Tom, you're muted. I see you talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you guys see the map of locations of students?
No, we see a Charlie Ortez email or letter.
You see it? Okay. How about now?
Yes,
Okay.
you
You
gotta
see it?
pop it open.
Sorry. I have two screens here. Is that clear? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there was a lot of questions about how traffic conditions would potentially change once, you know, students, the existing students that when moved to the proposed location, as well as once, you know, students go up in grade level and additional students are drawn in. And, you know, honestly, we feel that based on where students are currently located, that it's going to be very similar in terms of the number of vehicles, pedestrians, and modes of travel. I think about, I want to say 27% of the existing student body is residing in the Bronx, somewhere around that number, Charlie, 27 to 30.
It's actually, that information is all on the same slide. Tom, I don't know if you can zoom out.
Actually, it would be great if you could also send us this information, because it looks like it was presented to Youth and Education, but this would be good reference information for land use and TNT as well.
Yeah, we can follow up with that.
Yeah, 27% from the Bronx, I think, was the.
And it says 70% reside in Manhattan, but looking at your map, I mean, it seems to be heavily concentrated in Upper Manhattan.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was, you know, that's kind of the point that I'm raising about the fact that we really do feel that the survey that was completed of, you know, existing WIN students is going to be representative of what we would anticipate.
But it might be, Charlie, it might be helpful if you could just describe, it's not an accident, right? Can you just describe how kids are selected for the school and that process? Because it's very much focused on this area.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, as a public charter school, we do not screen students for any reason ever. We are a free public charter school. And so basically the way it works is we accept students, if we have more students than seats available, we do a public lottery, which is, you know, a digital way of like, you know, pulling numbers in order, and the first, like, you know, X amount get offered a seat, and then we just go on through the wait list. So we offer no screening. I think the reason that we're able to get so many folks in our school that are in the community, in our community, is because we've set up a lot of great relationships with daycares. So like We go in and we do lots of info sessions at daycare. We do private tours for daycare families from the Heights. So like they'll come into the school, you know, when we were in the building, they'll get like an inside look at everything. And then also because all of our historic families are clustered in this area, also word of mouth has always, you know, been the best, you know, way to share about the work. And so our current families tell other families who also live on the same block, and, you know, it just kind of grows naturally. You know, I can't remember ever really doing recruitment outside of CSD6. So I think it's really the recruitment, the relationships with daycares, and the current families that just are spreading the word.
I'm assuming you shared all of this with the Youth and Education Committee.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, because I mean, I received some feedback from the Youth and Education Committee and from Traffic and Transportation, and so it wasn't clear from the comments from Youth and Education the extent of the conversation. So it's good to hear it from you.
Happily.
And if there's other questions, you know, I'm happy to answer them as well.
Yeah.
Actually, this slide is from the present. It's from the Youth and Education presentation we gave on 5/11.
Mm-hmm. And just before we, you know, I sometimes have to remind myself and the rest of the committee that we are land use. We are not land use and everything else. But the school is currently located in Washington Heights, and you're on 164th Street, is it?
Correct.
And are you currently co-located in a public school building?
Correct.
So you're actually community-based, you're in a existing public school, and that's, you know, kind of a touchy issue with a number of folks, but you're actually, with this project, moving out of the public school building into your own space. So you'll be able to continue to provide the school program to local residents, but you will not be occupying space in a public school building.
Correct. And, you know, just as an update, I think it was 2 weeks ago, although all the days are blurring together anymore. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, our co-location extension for our current building was approved by the DOE. And so we've been working with the DOE to extend our co-location, which was supposed to end at this school year, for another 2 years, just so we could have more time to build the building before we moved out. And, you know, it was an easy process. Working with their central team and the school team was really easy, and it was great that they approved that. And so we feel really good about that and our partnership with the DOE.
Are there any questions, comments from the committee? And I can't see everyone, so you'll just have to unmute yourself and, you know, be careful not to speak over one another.
Yeah, I have a question, Wayne.
Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, when we spoke about it last month or maybe 2 months ago,
or three,
or maybe three, I don't remember, but in any event, the building, the current structure has like a 2.5 or 3.5 story, and only one, like a half of the parking on the roof will be enclosed, or there will be an envelope around it or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can, yes, that's correct. The existing building is a little bit strange, but let me zoom in on this. You can see the section I put up now, right? I want to make sure I'm not.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so the existing building has parking on the roof up here. It's an exposed roof and there's parking on this, but the facade goes all the way up to this point. And there's a portion of enclosed here. So we're basically, it's permitted as a 4-story building. We're basically putting a roof on that 4-story and then adding the gym on top of it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
When do you imagine this will be finished? Will there be half a school year spent on 164th and then a half there, or it's like not this coming year?
It's the occupancy would be for the September 2022.
So you'll begin the year there. You will not sort of begin in the middle of it.
Correct.
Correct. And that has a lot to do with this process, because we have to get we have to get BSA approval, and then we can apply to the building department, and then we can do the physical work. So it's just kind of stepped itself back that far. We tried to do it a year earlier, but I mean, we were hoping we could do it earlier, but it was just wasn't possible. There wasn't enough time.
Wayne, I have another question if nobody else have one before me.
Please go ahead.
Okay, in light of Local Law 97, is the heating system, as you presented to us about 2, 3, whatever it is, month ago, it was running on, the plan is to run it on natural gas. In light of LL 97, is there a plan to go electrification, meaning to electrify the heating system to run on electricity?
There is not. I mean, we're in the process now of complying with the latest energy code, which is the 2020. It's the one that just kicked in, and ASHRAE 20, which then maps over to ASHRAE 2016, which has also not been in effect yet. And so we will, and we're doing quite a bit in order to make the whole thing. I mean, it's smart design to begin with, but to comply with all of those things, so that overall the efficiency and energy usage of the building is very high. Every new iteration of the codes are getting stricter and stricter.
Yes, they are.
Right. And by 2040, you're going to have to be all on electricity, which that's why I'm asking. I thought maybe while now you're planning and thinking about, renovating the entire building, I thought you may want to be sort of in compliance for 2040, but
Yeah.
I guess
Well,
that
I
will
mean,
come later.
Well,
I would say that's an
look at that.
interesting thought. And also CB12 is supposed to have, although it has never been active, sort of a infrastructure task force, because one of the big questions is, what is the capacity of the electrical service in this entire community to support any major, conversion to electrification? My building is 169,000 square feet. We weren't on gas. We had to pay nearly $250,000 to convert to gas. I wonder what we'd have to pay to upgrade the service to convert to electricity. So I think that's something that the community board should look at and not just let slip by, because I don't think we're at all ready when it comes to infrastructure.
I would like to comment on that as well, because as Wayne does, in fact, as Wayne and OC and I do, we all live in co-op, so we have this rubbed in our faces all the time.
Yes, we do.
It turns out 2030 is still 10 years away, and presumably between now and then there will be improved technology to electrify stuff. So I wouldn't actually, we have people in my co-op sort of clamoring for that too, but at the moment, I think we should just go with what we have. And, again, by 2030 or certainly by 2040, there may be wonderful ways that we haven't thought of yet of turning electricity directly into heat, not by running it through resistors, which everyone knows is not the proper way of doing it. But so I agree that, we should always keep our eyes for the future, which is OC's suggestion. But I think we're not there yet, and we should, for the time being, stick with these technologies.
Very near future.
Yeah.
I would say it's a good point. We'll look at that. There are a number of issues associated with it. So, but I think it's a very relevant and thoughtful and pertinent point.
Okay. And, I guess we should actually move to have the committee consider, its position on this application. But something that we have not discussed, I just want to point out to the committee, because we might have touched upon it briefly in February. And I think it came up at the exec committee meeting in April in preparation. And that is, if you look at the materials that I forwarded in the last couple of days, which were, I guess, the applicant's response to BSA's questions on, page 8, it begins a list of the various sites that were considered in addition to this. And there are 6 sites that are listed that could not accommodate the school program. There are another 4 sites that were, not affordable. Basically, they were too expensive. And then there were another 3 sites that were just, more, I mean, there was a criteria of being within a mile of the existing location, and these 3 sites were much further away. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that, because I think someone asked, well, how come they couldn't go here, there, or wherever? And as you can see from the list there, there were 13, 14 sites other than this that were considered before they ended up here. And as it turns out, I understand that you did look at space in the building that it's being constructed next door, but the problem is they could not give you the floor to ceiling heights that you need to accommodate the music program, because they would have to have either, if they eliminated floor space, that would have increased the rent, which would have made it unaffordable.
That's
It
correct.
was unaffordable.
Yeah. So having said that, from the committee, would anyone want to make a motion to support the special permit?
I will. I'd like to make a motion to support the special permit.
So it's moved by Vivian. Is there a second?
I can second. I'm actually on the committee. I just spoke to Eli.
Okay. You never know.
And I will third it just in case she's not.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So just so everyone, and particularly for the new community board members, the way the voting occurs is the committee members, I can now save one. The committee members vote first, and then any other board members who are present who want to vote second, and then members of the public who are participating do not have to vote, but if they wish to vote, they can do so also. So I will begin. There is a motion supporting the special permit made by Vivian and second by OC and Jim. I'll just say that how it was a double second. And we'll do those in favor, against, and abstaining. So can I see everyone? I can't see Rosie. I can't see Omar. So
The other thing you can do is simply call the roll.
yeah, that's what I was going to do. So actually, Chris, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so how do you how do you vote?
In favor.
Jim?
Yes.
Rosie?
Yes.
Omar?
Due to my position at the DOE, I will be abstaining from this vote.
Okay.
Actually, he will be not voting on this vote.
Due to conflict.
Right, not
Okay.
abstaining. He will not be voting.
No vote.
Vivian?
Yes.
OC?
Yes.
So we have one, and I vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yes votes. Nothing against. 1 not voting. No abstentions. Do I have everyone? That's a total of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Are there, so for our new committee members who are present that would like to vote, how do you'd have to unmute yourself and one at a time let me know how you would like to vote. Leo, are you still there? Mariella, are you still there?
This is Mariella. I'm here. I also work for the DOE.
Okay.
Leo's still here. I don't think I could vote because I'm affiliated to DDC. So sure.
Is DDC, what, Jim, would DDC be a conflict of any kind?
I don't believe DDC is involved in this project in any way. Is it?
As of right now, the lead environmental review agency is DEP. And
But
based on
we're
the
talking about-
findings of the hazmat, DEC would not be involved.
Right, and the agency again was DEC, right?
DDC.
DDC, right, but they're not
Yes, Department of
involved.
Design and
Therefore, there
Construction.
is no conflict of interest, and therefore you are required to vote.
I'm in favor.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we have 1 in favor, no one in against, no one abstaining, and 1 not voting due to conflict again. Are there any members of the public participating who would like to vote? I see 2 participants have raised their hands. And how do I get to you? Paola, how do I get to folks with their hands raised?
Those participants are considered like public people, so they're not speaking in your panel, but if they want to vote, you can ask them, or they can post a question to your answer through the Q&A. Those are people that are outside. You have
Exactly.
seven attendees that are outside listening but can't speak.
Okay, so that is, so if you are an attendee and you would, like to vote for or against abstaining, please do that through chat and we can pick it up there.
No, Q&A, it's different.
Sorry, Q&A.
Right.
Q&A, yeah, and you can
Just
pick
make
it up
the
from there,
statement as
and
though
they
it were
can
your
also
question.
ask you questions there if they want.
Right, but as though it's your question, say, I'm in favor of this or I'm opposed to this.
Okay, so
Or you don't have to say anything one way or the other.
Yeah, so I see.
can also allow them to speak. You have a question from Nina. If you want her to speak, let me know.
Sure. I mean, if someone has a question, you can, and I see Jerry Culligan has voted in favor.
Okay, let me put Nina on because I guess she wants to ask something.
It says Nina is abstaining.
Okay, perfect.
Nina?
She
Hello?
has to unmute herself.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hello?
lost her.
Nina?
She's there. She's still on mute.
She had unmuted herself for a second.
She's on the panelist now and she's off mute. So, oh, there she is.
Oh, I'm just, the first time I'm trying to get CB12 on the, Zoom thing. I'm abstaining. I don't feel I have enough info. I don't want to oppose, but I don't feel I have enough information to also vote yes.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay, so that closes out the discussion of the special permit for BSA. It clearly passes. So just for clarity, the next step is the committee's resolution will be presented to the full board at the general meeting, which I believe is the 4th Tuesday of this month. And if the full board adopts that, that becomes the official position, and that resolution will then go out to BSA. The Wynn Music School team should email the office, Ebenezer, Paola, to make sure you get the invitation so that you can participate in the general meeting, probably just during public session to talk about that. I don't know if there would be time necessarily to do a presentation, and normally we don't do that, but during public session, you or family members, which would probably be maybe a little more pertinent to the community, can speak in favor of the school, the move, or you can just each briefly talk about that. So
Wayne, there is another community member named Joy that voted yes.
yes, I saw that. I
Okay.
have it open. I have it open.
Okay, the one thing is that the recording does not always capture the Q&A. So unless we verbalize that.
Well, yeah, I know.
not
So
gonna
I
make-
said that we had Jerry Culligan, who actually voted yes twice, but will only count it once.
Mhm.
Nina actually was able to get a line and said she was abstaining. And then Joy Gremolini, I believe it is, voted yes.
Mhm. Okay.
So with that, I thank you. And Steve Simon has joined us at 8:08, so I guess that's early. The next item on the agenda is an update on the West 158th Street row house district, something that has been presented to the the committee and the community board a couple times over the years, and the parties involved are Vivian Ducat, who is a committee member, and Matthew Spady, who happens to be one of my neighbors. And Matthew was one of the many local residents who was actively involved in the research and advocacy that went into advancing the Audubon Park Historic District. As just as a bit of background, and I see Pat Courtney, who is with the Historic Districts Council as well, but also has been active in advocating for historic preservation in Washington Heights and Inwood. When the Audubon Park Historic District, which is the residential buildings just north and west of the Audubon Terrace Historic District, when that was being proposed by LPC back in, I think, 2008, 2009, the Land Use Committee and the Community Board fully supported that. But one of the things that we noticed is there is a row of row houses that's going down the hill on 157th Street that literally abuts the Audubon Park Historic District that is not included. And as Matthew will tell you, if you look at the history of the development of what used to be the Audubon estate, those row houses are actually older development than the apartment buildings that were in fact included in the historic district. And while the apartment buildings are wonderful and they're indicative of the kind of pre-war apartment buildings that were developed and are representative of the urbanization of Upper Manhattan, driven by both the extension of the number 1 train moving north and Riverside Drive being extended. If you're looking at that urbanization of Upper Manhattan, we're leaving out an earlier stage in that urbanization, and from the perspective of capturing the history of it, that just doesn't make sense. So the committee and the community board has really continue to advocate for something to happen with those buildings. And if it cannot be an expansion of the Audubon Park District because LPC says the buildings are architecturally, different, well, they can be their own district. The resolution passed by the board in 2009 specifically asked LPC to work expeditiously to advance the designation of those buildings, and that was in 2009. It is 2020. So at the last month's committee meeting, someone asked about the status of a proposed development there. What's the status of the action to designate the area? So I've reached out to Vivian and to Matthew to give us an update, and with that, I will turn the floor, or maybe the screen, over to them. And Matthew, you need to unmute yourself.
Yep. Shall I try sharing my screen here and see how that goes?
Absolutamente.
Okay, just a second here. Share my screen. The host has disabled attendee screen sharing.
So that's Paola. You need to enable Matthew.
Hi,
Give me 1 second. Matthew. There you go, Matthew.
All right, thank you. Oh, yeah, here we go. Let me see. I'm going to try desktop 1.
Good.
I'm going to go to slide view. And now, are you seeing a slide?
Yes.
Yes,
Excellent.
indeed. Number 1
Good.
of 19.
Oh, actually, then let me switch, swap displays. Now you just see the slide.
Exactly.
Very
screen.
Good. Excellent. Oh, I did that. Wow. So Wayne, you gave really an overview. We've got a slide deck here that I sent a link so that the committee can view it afterwards. We don't really need to go through every slide in detail, but I'd like to just review a little bit. As Wayne just said, one of our primary objective is to preserve this row of houses, the 12 houses that were left out of the original designation. Back in, what was it, Vivian, 2015, 2016, Vivian noticed that there was some activity on the block, and we were quite concerned about what might happen with that block. And so we had been sort of dormant in working on getting it added to the Audubon Park Historic District, but we resumed then and put together a proposal, request for evaluation that we sent to Landmarks Preservation Commission to add those 12 houses to the existing Audubon Park Historic District. And we based that on both the historical and the architectural elements of a historic district. The historical being that that row of houses was on land that had always been part of the Audubon Park neighborhood. And the architectural being, as you just said, Wayne, that although they're row houses, they were an anticipation of the coming of the subway, just as the apartment houses that are in the historic district were a reaction to the coming of the subway. So they were all really a response to the coming and the arrival of rapid transit to northern Manhattan. If you look at that map there that's on your screen, this is the current Audubon Park Historic District and the Audubon Terrace. And over here are the 12 houses, and behind them is an undeveloped lot, which has always been a concern because being undeveloped, at the moment, it is still landlocked. That is, there's no direct access to it. But if any one of the houses on the street were bought by a developer who also bought that lot or owned that lot, then the house could be demolished or somehow used as an entryway to that lot, and development on it could rise above any of the existing buildings. And so those are the potential threats: the continued developing interest on the block, that undeveloped lot, and the potential of that lot being used with one of the houses for access. The people who live in the center of the block are actually, I think it's only the widow now, Mrs. Keeling, who lives in the center of the block, is elderly. She has children who have expressed in the past an interest to sell her home, and they also own that lot. So that one house in the lot would give a developer quite a bit of developmental square footage. We've had these, some of these slides are from the past when a developer bought these contiguous houses or non-contiguous houses on either side of the Keelings. That has been in surrogate court for several years, but it seems to have come out of surrogate court now. So again, we have the possibility of three houses in the center of the block being owned by one developer who could then have access to that undeveloped lot in the rear. LPC's reasons for refusing to add this block to the Audubon Park Historic District, their main one has always been that the topology was different between the apartment houses and the row houses. Also that there was this Riverside Drive corridor from 155th to 158th Streets that really was drew together the buildings on either side in the Audubon Park Historic District. We've come back with sort of answers for all of those things. For example, the buildings that are on West 156th and 157th Streets are off of that corridor, just as these on West 158th are. That didn't really fly. We also have pointed out that many of the historic districts in the other boroughs have mixed architectural typologies, that they're not necessarily all connected by central corridors, that they have altered facades. Some of the row houses do have altered facades, and that one of the things they also came back with was they weren't the best examples of row houses.
We never knew if it was a real objection or they were going to object to it for some other reason, and so they keep throwing these sorts of reasons at us, but there could be a more fundamental reason they don't want it.
Like they don't want to do it.
Exactly. I mean, and one of the frustrations is that the people who review a request for evaluation are the research group. the people who are actually the members, the voting members of LPC, may or may not really know that we have been submitting this. Because if it doesn't get past the research group, then it doesn't go to them. On the other hand, the research group takes its cue from the commissioner, and the commissioner in past really showed absolutely no interest at all. So one of the, and Vivian will speak to this in a moment, but one of the things that we're hoping is that the newest commissioner, who has now been on the job for more than a year, might be more amenable to this idea than the previous one was. We had, again, here's a slide. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it, but you can look at it later. What are the compelling reasons? And they really do have to do with what we just mentioned about sitting in the footprint, that they're distinct stage in the urbanization, good gracious, urbanization of Audubon Park's neighborhood, their relationship to rapid transit. The architect was a man named John Patrick Leo, who was prolific in northern Manhattan. He did more than 200 buildings. He lived in one of them on 146th Street. He attended the Church of the Intercession and was very active there. He was president of the Builders League and was also, for one term, the head of New York City's street cleaning department. Another angle that we are pursuing, and this is a long-term pursuit, is National Register status. HDC, Simeon at HDC suggested that if we got National Register status for the entire footprint of the Audubon Park neighborhood, that could be a compelling reason for LPC at least to relook at this idea. And that has been underway now for almost 2 years. At present, we have a consultant who is doing the architectural descriptions of all of the buildings. When the National Register folks at SHPA, and I always forget what those initials stand for, Wayne, I'm sure you know, and can say it right off the top of your head. But the folks in Albany, who are the coordinators for National Register status, when they reviewed the Audubon Terrace and Audubon Park designation reports, and then looked at this row, they immediately said, well, of course, the grouping that should be included in a historic district would have Audubon Terrace, Audubon Park, and these row houses, but they subtracted a couple of apartment buildings on 158th Street that are actually outside of the original Audubon Park, the historical Audubon Park. So Vivian, why don't you take over here and talk a bit about our chronology of what's been done.
What are we
Cuando
hearing?
Wayne estaba como presentando a la gente, dice, oh, and a former member, y salta ella, dice, oh, I'm not a member anymore. And dice, wait, but you haven't been in this committee for months.
Just waiting for
If
quiet.
there's any background noise, could we all
Ella estaba
mute?
en public safety sentada y que es parte de housing. So,
Paola,
yo aprendí,
Paola,
yo para enderezar.
Paola, Paola, se oye la conversación entera. I just let Paola know that her whole conversation was being blasted.
Thank you.
Without subtitles.
Without subtitles.
Right. So Vivian, why don't you give take over here and talk about the process and what's happened in the last couple of years in particular.
So you have some of this chronology in front of you in terms of, I mean, look, it was short that it took from 2003 to 2009 in order to designate the district without that street. There was one letter that we got back from LPC that actually claimed that the reason that they didn't incorporate it was because they thought it was different way back when. But you see, this is how we've gotten so many excuses. Pat Courtney actually is the person who encouraged us to apply to HGC for the 6 to celebrate. And with that, we remain very involved actually with Simeon Bancroft and other people. And there's actually a booklet, there's a link online that we can send you where they've put together a really nice photograph booklet about the neighborhood, which is something that they do for Historic Districts Council. Six to Celebrate Winners. We wrote a request for evaluation to landmarks in April of 2016 and got our first rejection in May of 2016. Then working on the calendars, which I always do, discovered that there was this whole file in the New York Historical Society about Bolton's Garden, and it included articles from the 20s and 30s from various newspapers talking about this. There was this amazing oasis in the middle of urbanizing New York. And there was also this sort of 4-page manifesto by Bolton himself. And Bolton was the resident of 636, and he was an archaeologist of Upper Manhattan. He was an early historical preservationist. He invented an elevator, a fast elevator that enabled skyscrapers. I mean, he was a real polymath, and his son produced, I think, 50 musicals and worked on Anything Goes. So they were quite a family. And Bolton had this idea of creating a cooperative that actually owned the space that's now the parking lot. And he worked to get everyone to take down their fences, and there was a sort of theatrical stage. And actually into the late 60s, some of the cement furniture and some of the sort of planted areas existed. We have been working with Mark Levine for a while, and we held a meeting that he spoke at, that Josette Bailey spoke at, whose family owned 630 West 158th Street starting in 1967. And this is a picture from when we had a meeting at River Terrace to describe what we were doing. And then we also had, I guess in November, we discovered of that year, 2016, the last of, well, actually not the last, but the last Scruggs to be living in that building passed away. And somehow mysteriously, even though the corporation is supposed to own it, it's ended up in the hands of the people who owned the former Corral Diner. So they've done a lot of interior renovations. They hadn't seemed to touch the exterior. This is in one of these photographs from the collection of the Bolton's Garden collection. We submitted another RFE, and because of the concern through connections, we got the New York Times to write a piece that Matthew was central in about the fact that of this drive to try to landmark this block. We got Gail Brewer on our side, and she wrote. We've gotten somebody who's still ongoingly helping us, if there's such a word as ongoingly, from Scott Stringer's office, who's the head of Community Affairs, Jessica Silver. I talked to her as recently as January, where she connected with Simeon Bancroft, the executive director of Historic Districts Council, to try to, 2 years later, to try to go after them again. And then everything hit the fan with the pandemic, and I haven't heard back from her. We got one more person on his own. Warren Wentick came toward, Wally Wentick came sort of found us and said, I'm sorry that I never joined your effort, but I want to join it now. In April 2009, the Bailey family of 630 actually sold their apartment. Their house. It's beginning to be that all the originals are pretty much gone, and we don't know how people down the west side of the block were never that much in favor. So we don't think that we necessarily have owners on our side. And now there's, there's definitely been a change since December of 2019 in terms of the status of the 3 houses that were part of an estate that owed taxes. And a resident of the block was telling me, Richard Feigen, who's done a beautiful renovation in 634, that they started to clean out everything out of those houses, and then mysteriously it all stopped. So I don't know what that means, and he didn't know what it meant, but there, little by little things are moving forward. So we were hoping it suggested that maybe the people who own those were going to renovate the interiors and leave the exteriors alone, but that's pure guesswork on our part. Should we do the next slide?
Sure.
Do you want to go back, Matthew?
Sure. So
come back.
one of the things that we have been trying to come up with is how to present this again. Because if we go back with the same RFE, even if we have a more a friendlier research group there at LPC, they're still going to say, well, you've submitted this twice and we've said no twice. Why are you sending it again? And one of the things that we have not really fully addressed is the cultural history of that particular block in relation to the Audubon Park Historic District, and also in contrast to it. One of the things that we didn't include, and actually we didn't know, and if it's okay for me to plug my book, I will. I have a book on Audubon Park coming out in September. You can find it on Amazon right now, Matthew Spady, S-P-A-D-Y. You can pre-order it. But in researching it, one of the things I learned was about the modern cultural history of that block as a continuation of some of its much older history. The first people we know about really from records who owned that land were the Watkins family. Actually, the Dykmans owned it before them, but we don't really know much about what the Dykmans were doing with it. But the Watkins family definitely farmed that land, as well as about 100 other acres surrounding it. Had a huge farm that was just south of where the Jamel Mansion is. Watkins was actually, they were friends with the Morrises. Anyway, they farmed their land with enslaved labor well into the early 1800s when New York State had begun a stepwise manumission program. There was law passed at the end of the 1700s that gradually when enslaved people reached a certain age, they would be free. And if they were born into slavery, and if they were already enslaved, then there was a timetable for them to be freed. And the Watkins family did have slaves. Around 1850, in contrast, Dennis Harris, who was a Methodist minister, as well as a bricklayer and a sugar refiner, and an ardent abolitionist, bought the property, and he built a sugar refinery at the foot of 160th Street. His Duane Street refinery was a known stop in the Underground Railroad. So it's quite possible that he used his sugar refinery there at 160th Street, where the River Arts apartments now stand, as another stop in the Underground Railroad, as it was farther north outside of the city and a step closer to Canada. So you've got that sort of early history having to do with first enslaved people and then with an abolitionist who owned the land. Then if you jump into the middle of the 20th century, Joseph and Levon Scruggs bought number 626 in 1954. And as far as I know, they were the first African-American property owners on the block. Vivian has a lead that I need to follow up about another person who owned a house, another African-American, a barber, I believe you told me, Vivian,
Right.
who owned property farther down the block. So we'll have to find out when he bought that property. By the time that this was happening in the mid-1950s, all of the houses on the block had been converted to multifamily residences, and a couple were even single occupancy rentals. And then as the decades wore on, the area adjacent in the Audubon Park neighborhood, or the apartment buildings, was undergoing the same sort of urban blight that many cities in the United States were. But something really remarkable began to happen on West 158th Street. And that was that African-American families began to buy the homes and to convert them back from these multifamily homes, single room occupancy rentals, to single family homes. Joseph Arthur Bailey, whose daughter Josette has worked with us on this project, and Sherman Carter both bought in 1967. And what's really interesting about their purchases, and this is one of the things that I learned in completing the Audubon Park history, was that this was the era of redlining, that pernicious practice of denying loans and therefore keeping people of color out of certain neighborhoods. The Audubon Park neighborhood was not the top. It was not a green neighborhood, but it was a blue, which was the second tier, which meant that most of the residents were of some sort of European extraction, and that property values were still very strong and looked like they might stay that way. So you have that blue area would have been very difficult for African Americans to buy into, but the way that they did it was that they got the owners of the homes to finance their mortgages, so they didn't have to go to a bank. This was a pretty common way. I say common; it didn't happen that much, but it was a way that someone.
It happened a lot in the African American community, actually.
It did, Wayne. Thank you.
Yep.
It happened to the Riviera as well.
But not in the 50s, I wouldn't think. Or sorry, the 60s. But anyway, back to the story. I was in touch with there's a wonderful website about redlining, if you can call it a website about redlining wonderful, but it's full of information. And I was in touch with the professors who run it out of the University of Richmond, and they confirmed that this was, as you were just saying, Wayne, a common practice to have the seller finance the mortgage. That way you didn't have to deal with the bank, you didn't have to deal with this possibility of redlining. And therefore you probably had a chance to look at that slide while I've been talking to see about Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, who were really quite fascinating people. He was a Republican politician and lawyer who tried to unseat Adam Clayton Powell, and she was an attorney, certainly well ahead of her time. She would have been in school in the 1940s or early 50s, becoming an attorney. Ruth Johnson also bought onto that block. And Wayne, you actually knew Ruth, didn't you?
Of course, yes. Yeah. She was my upstairs neighbor.
Right, exactly. Ruth Johnson owned or was an original purchaser at the Grinnell, but she, before that, had purchased number 634 on this block, and she also had a self-financed mortgage, that a seller-financed mortgage. She and her daughter Robin continued living at the Grinnell, but they owned this home and she rented it out for additional income. And of course, being right around the corner, she could take an active part in the block, which had a block association. They had block parties. Everyone on the block really sort of, excuse me, looked after each other. So, excuse me, in 1974, the Keelings, Loretta and Marshall Keeling, bought the house in the middle of the block, number 638. And that really gave African Americans control, with the exception of one house, control of the eastern 8 houses on the block. Then Sherman Carter leveraged his ownership into buying another house. And then he and Ruth Johnson, when number 640 became available, joined together and bought that one. By the time they bought that one, the price was much, much higher than any of the previous ones had been. And they actually did, by that time, get a bank loan. So this is a really sort of fascinating part of the cultural history, not just of the block, but in comparison to what was happening in the 70s and 80s just around the corner, excuse me, where there was a great deal of petty crime and major crime. One of the people who gave me an interview for the Audubon Park book talked about how he lived at 780 and his family, first the wheels were stolen off of their vehicles, and then 2 vehicles, not one, but 2 vehicles were stolen and they never saw them again. So there was quite a bit of unrest in the adjacent neighborhood, and yet you have these families forging their own community on this block. It really wasn't until the 1990s that things began to change again and sort of go through another cycle. And that was when this first generation, the Carters, became more elderly. as did the Baileys. And as the second generation took over, some of them sold, some of them rented, they moved elsewhere and rented. And so the stability of the block began to erode a bit then. In the last couple of decades, so in the last, let's say 15 years, there's been renewed interest. Vivian mentioned earlier that Richard Feigen has restored number, which is it 630?
634, the one that was Ruth
634.
Johnson's house, yeah.
And then Josette, before she sold the Bailey house, did a lot of work restoring that. The houses there, you can see in this particular photo on the far end, both had been burnt out in the early 2000s. They were nothing but shells, and both of them have now been reclaimed. The one in is a single family with an apartment in the basement. The one on the far end, which now has that pop-up on the top, just was renovated, and renters moved in just before Christmas of 2020. Is that right? Yes, Christmas, last Christmas. So around November, September, November, 2019, thank you, is when the first renters have moved in. I'm not sure if it's completely occupied now, but there are now 10 apartments in that building. So this is the approach that we intend to take with writing a new RFE. It'll be built in great part on the previous one, but it will have a new element of cultural history that we hope will catch the attention of LPC and perhaps cause them to at least look once more at this block for historic preservation.
And there's new leadership at LPC, so there's also the chance for a new attitude coming from on top.
Exactly.
I have two questions.
Is that Steve?
That is Steve Simon.
Yeah. First, let me begin by saying I was late in calling into this meeting because I was attending a meeting of the Community Board 2 Parks Committee.
Yes, I let them know that.
We knew
Okay.
that.
All right. Well,
We
then.
could still tease you.
Okay. Well, I don't think that comment earlier was necessary then.
Which comment?
Yours. So
I was simply for the record pointing that you were joining at 8:08 because
Yeah.
Chris is taking the minutes.
Okay, you said something after that.
I always do.
Yeah, thank you.
Anytime.
Matthew, in terms of the cultural history, isn't it worth mentioning that that Bolton is a significant historical figure, I would think. Isn't it worth mentioning that he lived in 638?
It is, Steve, and we actually had that. We focused quite a bit on Bolton in the original RFE, and we wrote about, one of the things we pointed out was the irony of how Bolton had tried to save Audubon's home at where, of course, where you live, or in the building which replaced his home, and how that failed, and how ironic it would be if trying to save his home did as well. So yeah, we did focus a lot on not just him as a historian, but him as a civic leader, because he was the president of the Washington Heights Taxpayers Association.
Right.
He also, his archaeological pursuits, his writing, and as Vivian was saying, his engineering. He really was quite an amazing.
Yeah. And in the prior presentations, because this was just a bit of an update and then presentation of new information, but in the prior presentations, Matthew and Vivian and others did in fact emphasize the Bolton connection.
All right, so we're keeping that as part of our presentations, I believe. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Exactly.
Okay. Could you go back?
Yeah, sorry.
Could you go back to the early outline showing the site? Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Have we looked at whether or not it's possible to develop the vacant lot by using the entryway off the alley instead of having to knock down any of the row houses? Is it legally permissible for them to use the
No.
alleyway as an entrance?
We previously looked at that. That's not a legal street.
Called Audubon Lane, actually.
It's the answer is it's not a legal street, so no,
Right.
they cannot do that.
And they don't actually, the deed to that property, even if it were, does not carry the right of way on that alley.
But I think that alley does have an entrance for the cars that are parking behind there.
The alley is usable, but that lot doesn't have a right of way to it. In other words, the deed for the lot did not include that right of way.
We actually had it examined, so we
Did, okay.
Yeah.
due
But so
diligence on this.
So then if cars are entering there from the alley, is that illegal?
That's a different question. And when we discussed this with, I think, both city planning and city planning checked out to DOB, that alley, right away, whatever, would not be a legal street from which you could have a building address. You would have to enter from 158th Street to have a legal address. That that alley, I don't know if it was ever properly mapped, but the ability to drive a car in and out doesn't make it a legal street from which you can then enter a building.
Okay, well now I'm wondering whether or not having a parking lot where cars are entering from the alleyway is also legitimate.
Well, I
That's
think
a
the
different
biggest
issue.
issue is to wait for things to not be to move quickly enough so that things won't be knocked down. I mean, that's, I do know that the Keelings are entertaining all kinds of brokers and lawyers and and potential buyers. So it seems like with every day I worry that something is going to go.
Right. So just in respect of the time, we are pushing 9 o'clock, and this was a wonderful update. I wonder if any of the committee members, particularly committee members who are seeing this for the first time, have any questions or comments. And if you so, you'd have to unmute yourself. And I would say hearing none and seeing none. Vivian, Matthew, I think this was wonderful. As you can tell, there is continued, interest in what's going on here. And I think the research that has led to more information on the cultural significance of the area simply, builds on the argument for designation. There's the architectural, obviously. There's the historical, that's, the urbanization of what used to be, suburban, if you can believe it, suburban Manhattan. And then there is the, the cultural, which is, the link and the links to the African-American, but the African-American homeowners in Upper Manhattan. So, I mean, it's hitting on all three areas that the New York City landmarks law, provides for, and you can be designated under any one, although LPC tends to favor heavily the architectural. That's not a requirement, but this is hitting all three.
I have a quick comment, a question / comment.
Yes, Elsie?
Okay. Can you go back to the slide that show all the buildings from, it's kind of when you go down.
That?
No, keep going.
The older picture?
The older picture.
Oh, sure.
This one. Okay. I'm just curious if somebody, or maybe some of the owners thought about bringing back the railing. I know it's a small detail, but in my view, I feel that it looks really uniformed here, and it's actually highlight the buildings. The way it is now, everyone has their own style of railing and fences or whatever, and it's somewhat like, I feel that it kind of takes away from the buildings. That's the comment. I mean, Yeah.
Isn't that totally up to them though? I mean,
I know it, but I'm putting it out because I look at that and it looks so nice. And then I look at the last photo you guys showed, which was like, okay, you got.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't stress that too much because landmarks would
Yeah.
say, oh, well, that's the reason why we're not designated.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing is, and we learned this, not to stretch the meeting out too much, when landmarks is looking at designation, they're looking at the site or the building in its current condition. So the fact that at one point you had, and it's not even clear to me if those were the original stoop, because architecturally the buildings are different. So for them to all have the same style stoop seems questionable. It seems that at some point there may have been a deliberate effort to do that. But even so, if this area were designated and LPC were to say that the consistent stoops represents a significant period, when one is doing a major exterior renovation that impacts the porch, that's when they would have to go back and have the porch design reviewed. But first, the first thing would be to get it designated.
Yeah, I got it. No, I get it. I just had to say it because it's like
Yep.
kind of eyesore the way it is.
that was a very early picture. That was when there only were the initial 8 buildings. That was an 1897 image.
Looks really
and then they
nice.
built the rest of them.
Okay.
So once again, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Vivian.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
Is there any old business? Is there any new business?
Summertime.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes,
Second.
moved by Steve,
I second the motion.
and that was at 8:50. All those in favor? I'm assuming everyone is. So I wish everyone as enjoyable a summer as we can make it, and I'm sure we can be creative. I, of course, look forward to seeing and coordinating with everyone at the general meeting, and take care.
You
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.